One of the big concerns with final gathering is how to eliminate or minimize the flickering you may get from rendering consecutive frames. Now, the big problem with flickering is it usually arises from high frequency textures. So textures that have a lot of variation in color and pattern. And if they're not sampled enough, basically at one frame you'll get a certain area sampled, a certain color, and then another frame it'll sample another area of that texture, and that will result in the flickering kind of effect on objects surrounding the high frequency texture. So there's a few ways to get around this. Basically, you can use brute force and increase your accuracy tremendously. So set the accuracy to 1,000 or 1,500. And what that does, it samples a texture at an increasing rate, so you actually get less flickering. But the problem is performance takes a big hit. The other option is to increase the radius, so you get a blurred out indirect illumination effect, but again the flickering is minimized because you're not sampling the texture at such a minute level and just getting the gradual kind of color from it. But the problem there is you lose quality from the actual indirect illumination, and it's also not foolproof. You probably will still get some flickering with the more problematic textures. One suggestion to do is to use the ray type node to actually change what the objects evaluate for final gathering. So instead of evaluating the high resolution, highly detailed texture, you can evaluate a more simple render tree that will minimize the flickering effect. So just to show you this in action a bit, let's just select our grid that's lighting our scene, and we're going to replace the shader with the checkerboard just to mimic the effect of high frequency texture. Let's put this to 15, I guess would be best. Something like that. And let's just pull the camera back out. Something like that. So what we're going to get here is the typical result with a high frequency texture. So you can see basically this object is 50% black, 50% white. So the overall color contribution would be a gray shade. And you can see this object is lit fairly gray, but you are getting a lot of variation within the gray. So you have some areas that are very dark, and you have some very light areas. And the problem is, as it keeps sampling the checkerboard pattern over the animation, you're going to get shimmering because the sampling is sometimes hit a white panel, sometimes hit a black panel. And this results in a lot of the problems people experience with final gathering. So like I mentioned, what we could do is increase the accuracy or increase the radius. Again, both those solutions aren't quite as efficient as you might want them to be. So what we're going to do is get the ray type node that's under the switch menu, ray type, and we're going to plug that into the surface. So what this node has is a bunch of different ports where you can connect alternate render trees for it to evaluate for those calculations. So for example, we could hook up a separate shader into the reflection port. So whenever this checkerboard pattern is reflected in an object, it'll evaluate a separate render tree rather than the checkerboard pattern. At the moment in the eye array, we just have a red color plugged in. So it's just rendering red. If we plug the checkerboard pattern in there, you'll see for the eye array, it'll evaluate the checkerboard now. So we get that effect. If you look at the reflection of the checkerboard, it's actually this blue color because it's evaluating the reflection port on the ray type node. So what we want to do is plug this into the reflection port as well, so it reflects in other objects properly, and as well for refraction. So where it's transparent, it's seen through a transparent object, we want it to refract a checkerboard pattern as well. So everything's correct there. The only thing is now is there's an option at the bottom for final gathering. We can either use the eye port for final gathering, which it's currently doing, or we can evaluate it through the final gathering port. So now it's going to use this constant color to evaluate for final gathering lighting. So I can just set the color there to gray, or we can just plug in a constant shader into the final gathering port and actually just open up that shader and set that to our 50% gray, or whatever. We can tune that as we want. And you can see the result basically is for the render, we get the checkerboard pattern showing for primary rays, and we get a nice stable result for the final gathering, which really won't have any problems with flickering at all that you'd regularly see. And the benefit is there's no need to increase the accuracy or increase the radius here to eliminate the flickering. We can use it as is. So that's a little technique to optimize scenes for final gathering.